Edmonton, capital of the Canadian province of Alberta, is the most northerly large city on the continent, with a population exceeding 370,000. Supporting itself as a wheat-growing and industrial center, Edmonton was long known as the gateway to the north, from which men took off for the subarctic and the Arctic to seek riches in furs and minerals. Not until 1947, when oil in quantity was struck nearby, did Edmontonians learn that they were sitting astride a grid of oil fields, among the richest on the continent. And from then on, the city entered a continuing era of prosperity. Some 250 air miles northeast of Edmonton, on the Athabasca River, lies Fort McMurray, a settlement named for a fur trader of the mid-19th century. After the site was visited by an earlier fur trader, Peter Pond, in the 18th century, it became a gateway to the still farther north. Fort McMurray existed for generations as a fur trading post and as a jumping-off point for missionaries, trappers, traders, Royal Canadian Mounted Policemen, government officials, explorers, and eventually mineral seekers as well. By the early 1920s, the community had rail connection with Edmonton, but no through motor road. Just south of Fort McMurray was established a railhead depot called Waterways, from which northward bound passengers and freight arriving by train from Edmonton proceeded downstream aboard steamers plying the Athabasca and connecting streams to distant outposts. By the early 30s, Fort McMurray had become a base for bush planes, which took off from the Athabasca or the confluent Clearwater River, with passengers, mail, and freight heading for more northerly outposts. Always, Fort McMurray was a way station for people going somewhere else. But not for everybody. Peter Pond in the 18th century had observed Indians caulking their canoes with strange bituminous sands peculiar to the region, outcroppings of which occurred along the riverbanks. Canadian government geologists investigated these outcroppings as far back as 1875. One of them, of a later generation, S.C. Ells, pioneered the use of the tar sands as paving material for Edmonton streets in 1915. Research work was continued by other geologists and engineers. An early attempt at commercial development was made by Max W. Ball, a petroleum geologist and engineer who, with Canadian capital, started building a plant a mile south of Fort McMurray in 1936. In 1940, under the banner of Abasand Oils Limited, the plant went into operation to recover oil from the mined sand. Work at the Abasand plant was overshadowed by events in the summer of 1942. Suddenly, there was great activity in the area. United States engineer troops poured into Waterways and Fort McMurray to expedite the building and launching of barges for the shipment of thousands of tons of equipment and supplies for a great wartime defense project called Canal, short for Canadian Oil. Canal was designed and carried out to develop an oil field near the Arctic Circle on the Mackenzie River and to transport the oil by pipeline 600 miles across the Mackenzie-Yukon Divide to Whitehorse in the Yukon Territory, to be refined there, and then to be distributed up and down the Alaska Highway to fuel planes and trucks. The irony of it was that just as Edmonton had been regarded as the gateway to the north when it could also have been an end itself, Fort McMurray and its environs could have been tapped as the source of one of the greatest deposits of oil the world has ever known. But it was a matter of timing. The time was still 25 years away. During and following World War II, research went on unremittingly with Athabasca's tar or oil sands. One of the scientists who pioneered in oil sand, Dr. K.A. Clark of the Research Council of Alberta, said in the early 50s, companies with plans ready ahead of time will be in an advantageous position to profit from what has the earmarks of a development of major proportions. Such a company was Sun Oil, and through its subsidiary, Great Canadian Oil Sands Limited, known as GCOS, it engaged Canadian Bechtel Limited in December 1962 to make a comprehensive study of the technical and economic feasibility of a large-scale plant. The study, completed in July 1963, concluded that the project was feasible and recommended a field test program to obtain design criteria for the extraction process, and also to gain experience in the handling of the oil sands. No time was lost. A site was cleared close to the northward flowing Athabasca River at Tar Island, 20 miles downstream from Fort McMurray. Here in the wilderness, a test plant was built. It went into operation in October of 1963, producing a substantial quantity of bitumen. In this field laboratory, over 1,000 experiments were carried out over a period of 2 years by GCOS and Bechtel, and under practical conditions, problems of the extraction process were solved. A project office was opened in Edmonton, where engineering and administration were carried on, with close cooperation between GCOS and all of the governmental agencies, both federal and provincial, that had to be dealt with. With offices in the field as well as in Edmonton, Bechtel supervised development of plant design, procured equipment and materials, maintained construction and scheduling controls, and conducted continuous on-site inspections. Using data gathered from years of research and the practical results of the pilot plant operation, engineers put together a scale model of the commercial plant, which was designed to produce 45,000 barrels per day of high-gravity synthetic crude oil. Once the details had been worked out, the model was broken down into individual units which could be reassembled at the job site, there to supplement drawings for the guidance of engineers and craftsmen. From the model, supervisors could work out the arrangement of piping and structures and determine how best to plan rigging operations. By the summer of 1964, the plant site was being graded after trees, brush, and muskeg had been cleared away. Earth moving, including raw tar sand for access roads, went on continuously. Over 1 million cubic yards of material had to be shifted. The number of men at the plant site kept expanding toward a peak of more than 2,300, nearly all of them Canadians, many from Fort McMurray and the Edmonton area, many from other parts of Canada, and many who were new citizens from other countries, nearly all of them living as well as working at the job site. Providing sleeping, eating, and recreation facilities for this workforce was a major operation in itself. Trailers were turned into modular units, comprising bedrooms, bathrooms, and 3 separate kitchens and dining halls. As many as 1,680 men could be fed simultaneously in 12 minutes. workdays led to gargantuan appetites. During a typical week, the crews consumed 18,000 pounds of meat, 1,500 loaves of bread, 480 pounds of coffee, 2,900 pies, and 1,100 gallons of fresh milk. In summer, the temperature may rise to 100 degrees. In winter, it may occasionally drop to 60 degrees below zero, but 40 below is not uncommon. On such days, one of the GCOS workers, an erstwhile trapper who did not live in camp, commuted by dog team to and from his cabin in the bush. Through the winter of 1964 and 1965, all supplies had to be trucked over a winter road, including a crossing of the frozen Athabasca at Fort McMurray. A permanent heavy-duty bridge was needed. Steel workers braved sub-zero temperatures to place the superstructure on 8 piers and an abutment on either bank to ready the bridge in time for next summer's hauling. Was completed on schedule, an integral part of the tar sand development project. The townspeople of Fort McMurray turned out for the formal opening, for it was their bridge. Plant equipment and materials could now go by rail from Edmonton to Waterways. From there, they could be trucked through Fort McMurray and over the new bridge and access road to the GCOS site. Components too heavy or bulky to be maneuvered overland were transported by barge from Waterways to Tar Island. To get such components onto barges, ingenious poles were erected and rigged to handle enormous weights. After the first year of the tar sand development, Fort McMurray was showing the effects. The town was booming, yet it was not a boom town in the old sense. Unlike the boom town of gold rush days that mushroomed to capture a fast buck before becoming a ghost town, Fort McMurray was building on a foundation of black gold. Its citizens knew that this black gold would not run out in their time, or their children's, or grandchildren's. This town, then, was building for the long haul, building for generations of growth and prosperity, and building wisely and well. Through the summer and autumn of 1965, construction at Tar Island went on apace. The onset of the second winter called for special protection. Buildings were insulated and plastic screens were put up where necessary to shield men and machines from frost and biting winds. An inflated portable plastic bubble big enough to enclose an Olympic-sized swimming pool sheltered concrete pouring and other operations requiring moderate temperatures. Along the newly built road to Edmonton, in the bitter cold of early 1966, men and machines were laying a 266-mile, 16-inch pipeline. It was designed ultimately to move southward as much as 45,000 barrels per day of synthetic crude oil from the GCOS plant to an existing terminal and tank farm at Edmonton. After its scheduled completion in August of 1966, the line would carry northward from Edmonton large consignments of crude oil, condensate, and diesel oil for the startup of various process units. With these products delivered, the line would then carry northward some 2 billion cubic feet of natural gas as startup fuel for the boilers in Tar Island Steam Electric Generating Plant, whose normal fuel would be coke, a byproduct of the tar sands. In sub-zero weather, lining up and welding preceded ditch digging so that each day's increments of the pipeline would be buried and backfilled before the earth could become hard to handle through freezing. Material kept flowing to the job site. Neither snow nor cold nor gloom of night kept couriers from their appointed rounds. On into the spring of 1966, snow flurries were commonplace. Through the summer of 1966, the GCOS plant was taking on the look of completion. However, there were still heavy, intricate lifts to be made. There were miles of wiring and piping. There were valves and controls, and 1,000 internal details to be attended to. Something new was added in the way of equipment. Assembly was well started on 2 giant bucket wheel excavators imported piecemeal from Germany. They were adaptations of excavators used in Western Europe for open pit coal mining, and they would here dig out the raw tar sand to feed the plant. The third winter rolled around, and on into May 1967, the Athabasca River at Fort McMurray was still frozen from shore to shore. A timing device was set up on the bridge to register the first movement of the ice to settle a sweepstake. Early one morning, the ice began to run. The bucket wheel excavators were now undergoing tests. TOS installation was substantially complete. First the power plant, then other units were started up for a series of test runs. Fort McMurray reflected the development of the tar sands. In 1967, the town's 3-year growth was striking. Only here and there was a relic of a bygone era. From a permanent population of 1,200 in 1964, the town had expanded in 1967 to more than 3,500 and would level off at around 5,000 within another year. Gone was any feeling of isolation that the residents may have had. True, since the early 20s they had had a railroad, and less than 10 years after that they could fly out and in. But now they had an all-weather provincial highway over which they could drive their own cars to or from Edmonton. And only a short distance south of town was a paved airport which for years had provided regular commercial service. On the morning of the 30th of September 1967, residents of Fort McMurray had a chance to witness the landings of more airplanes at their airport than had ever been parked there at one time before. Both jets and conventional aircraft came in, 30 or more, bringing government officials, businessmen, engineers and scientists, reporters, photographers, and television technicians from near and far. For this was the beginning of a big day. The occasion was the dedication of the plant at Tar Island. At the plant, the focal point was the blimp-like plastic structure that had served in cold weather for concrete pouring and other operations. Here the visitors, some 600 of them, assembled to enjoy luncheon and listen to the observations of honored guests.